The 9,948th meeting of the Security Council is called to order. The provisional agenda for this meeting is the situation concerning the Democratic Republic of the Congo. The agenda is adopted. In accordance with Rule 37 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the representatives of the Democratic Republic of the Congo and Rwanda to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. In accordance with Rule 39 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite Ms. Bintu Keita, Special Representative of the Secretary General and Head of the United Nations Organization Stabilization Mission in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of item 2 of the agenda. At this meeting, the Council will hear briefings by Ms. Bintu Keita and Ambassador Imran Kanu, Permanent Representative of Sierra Leone, in his capacity as Chair of the Security Council Committee, established pursuant to Resolution 1533, concerning the Democratic Republic of the Congo. I now give the floor to Ms. Bintu Keita.
Madam President, distinguished members of the Security Council, His Excellency Mr. Hippolyte Mfulu, Chargé d'Affaires of the Permanent Mission of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, His Excellency Ambassador Caroline Martin Goga, Permanent Representative of the Republic of Rwanda. Thank you for the opportunity to brief today on the situation in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. I wish to begin by congratulating the Democratic Republic of the Congo for its election as Vice President of the 80th session of the General Assembly and as a non-permanent member of the Security Council for 26 to 27. These milestones reflect the General Assembly's confidence in the leadership of the Democratic Republic of the Congo within the international community. Madame la Présidente,
Madam President, the tensions do continue, but the front lines and negotiations are moving, opening up a path to peace. The signing this afternoon in Washington by the Ministers of Foreign Affairs of the Democratic Republic of the Congo and of Rwanda of the draft peace agreement is a major step forward towards the end of the conflict. I would like to welcome the tireless efforts made by the United States in facilitating this agreement, which marks a decisive step towards peace and stability in the Democratic Republic of the Congo and in the region of the Great Lakes. I also would like to welcome and commend the constant efforts of the President João Lourenço of Angola, who is chairperson in office of the African Union, and the determined commitment by the President Faure Gnassingbé of Tonga, who was the African Union mediator. I also underscore the contributions made by the panel of facilitators, which consisted of eminent former African heads of states and, of course, the role played by the state of Qatar. I encourage all of the leaders to promote a climate of tolerance. We need to promote dialogue rather than division and actively work towards national cohesion. It is essential to have that for the stability of the country. I also welcome the domestic Congolese initiatives, and most particularly the meeting between President Felix Antoine Tshisekedi Chilombo with religious leaders and some actors of the political opposition so as to find national solutions and open up a road towards dialogue and reconciliation. And with this prospect, the Congolese authorities should pay heed to the concerns having to do with the shrinking of the political and civic space. And in this spirit, I reiterate my appeal in favor of adopting a draft law against tribalism, racism, and xenophobia, which would be an essential step towards preventing the abuses which threaten national unity.
I commend all the parties, including the AFC M23, for enabling me to visit Goma 2 weeks ago for the first time since the fall of the city in January. My visit allowed me to meet MONUSCO civilian and uniformed personnel after a very difficult time. The goal was to boost their morale and reaffirm MONUSCO's commitment to conflict-affected communities. My visit also aimed to engage the AFC M23 on operational challenges related to the implementation of our mandate. Before my visit, the International Committee of the Red Cross mediated an agreement between the government, the AFC M23, and MONUSCO. With the mission's logistical support, 1,359 unarmed members of the Congolese Defense and Security Forces and some members of their families who had been sheltering in Goma under our protection for 3 months were transported from Goma to Kinshasa. We continue to seek a solution for the civilian and unarmed elements who remain in our bases. In recent days, some progress has been made towards the lifting of restriction on MONUSCO's ability to operate effectively. This includes easing of staff border crossing, the release of fuel trucks, and granting of access to the United Nations terminal at Goma Airport to assess its status. A potential first step towards the long-awaited resumption of rotations is scheduled to take place in early July. It will bring a major relief and moral boost to our peacekeepers. I am hopeful that these positive developments could lead to greater freedom of movement for the mission, predictable crossings for staff, as well as a seamless resupply of our peacekeepers and their rotation. Madam President, while diplomatic efforts focus on ways to address the current crisis, the situation in other regions within MONUSCO's areas of operation also demand urgent attention. In Ituri province, retaliatory attacks by Codeco and Zaire armed groups have continued to affect villages and internally displaced person sites, leading to serious disruption of medical services for vulnerable populations. Two new armed groups have emerged, led by Innocent Kaina and Thomas Lubanga, both convicted of serious international crimes, including the recruitment of children. In North Kivu and Ituri, attacks on civilians by the ADF have decreased in recent months, yet their deadliness persists. The threat posed by the ADF has not diminished, but rather evolved, as the group is changing its strategy. The group is now seeking local support to boost its funding. In this context, MONUSCO continues to leverage its comprehensive protection strategy to reduce and mitigate threats against the civilian population, strengthen community resilience and local capacity, improve early warning and rapid response, and promote human rights and accountability. This week, MONUSCO facilitated the second round of the Aru Peace Dialogue under the leadership of Ituri provincial authorities with the participation of Codeco, Zaire, and other armed groups. Building on previous political efforts and the recent large-scale launch of reintegration efforts by the National Disarmament, Demobilization, Community Recovery and Stabilization Program, PDDRCS in Ituri, as well as in Beni and Lubero, hundreds of disarmed combatants have now joined community projects offering employment opportunities, vocational training, human rights education, and other income-generating activities for themselves and their communities. At the same time, MONUSCO is actively supporting justice efforts. In Ituri, mobile courts are making significant progress. Perpetrators of conflict-related sexual violence, whether state agents or members of armed groups, are being prosecuted and tried. Members of Codeco militia have been convicted of crimes against humanity. In Beni, the temporary transfer of the force headquarters has strengthened our collaboration with the Congolese defense and security forces. Our patrols, including those with the Congolese National Police, have enabled us to step up our protection efforts. In some areas, this has enabled the return of institutions, public services, and above all, people to their fields and livelihoods. Madam
President, violence in the east of the Democratic Republic of the Congo continue disproportionately impacting the women, boys, and girls. Rape and other forms of sexual violence are still being used systematically as a weapon of war. The healthcare facilities are very frequently targeted. Men and boys accused of having links with the opposing forces run the risk of being abducted, whereas the women and girls who have survived sexual violence see their access, which is crucial for them, to health care considerably limited. More than 290 schools have been destroyed this year throughout the DRC, particularly in the east of the country, and this deprived more than 130,000 children of learning. In Ituri, the cycle of violence keeps 1.3 million children outside of the educational system, and this particularly applies to girls. The humanitarian situation in the Democratic Republic of the Congo is untenable. Throughout the country, 27.8 million people are in situation of food insecurity, and about 1.4 million children are suffering from acute malnutrition. Approximately 7 million people have been displaced within the country several times, frequently, and principally because of violence. Insecurity, the closure of airports in Goma and Kavumu, and the blocking of the main routes seriously impede aid supplies. 12 humanitarians have been killed since the beginning of the year. The security crisis in the east of the country has aggravated the humanitarian situation, and we do not have sufficient means to respond to that. The suspension of funding coming from the main donor, which used to cover 70% of the humanitarian response in 2024, means that the humanitarian actors have to concentrate their efforts only on vital emergencies. We're now at the end of June, and the humanitarian response plan is only 11% funded. Given the deterioration of the humanitarian situation and the drastic reduction of funding, I call upon the international community to act without delay. We have to guarantee the resources on which millions of lives depend.
Is complicating the disengagement and the transition of the mission, to which we remain fully committed when conditions allow. The path to lasting peace in the Democratic Republic of the Congo requires shared responsibility. It demands collective action. In this regard, I thank the Peacebuilding Fund for supporting joint United Nations efforts. In conclusion, Madam President, I am encouraged by progress made to reach a political solution to the recurring cycles of conflict in Eastern Democratic Republic of the Congo. MONUSCO continues to stand ready to support these efforts, sustained by the decision and the will of this Council, and I thank you.
I thank Ms. Keita for her briefing. I now give the floor to Ambassador Kanu.
Madam President, distinguished colleagues, I have the honor to deliver a statement in my capacity as Chair of the Security Council Committee established pursuant to Resolution 1533 concerning the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Since I last provided an update on the work of the committee on 30th September 2024, I would like to take this opportunity to provide a brief overview of my visit, together with a number of committee members, to Angola, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Uganda, and Rwanda between the 14th and 25th November 2024. Madam President, my visit in November 2024 was the 7th visit by the chair of the committee to the Democratic Republic of the Congo since 2015. While my predecessors had last visited Uganda and Rwanda in 2022, it was the first visit to Angola by the chair of the committee. The visit also included a very useful stop in Goma, which had not been possible in the previous visits. The visit took place in a climate of regional tensions and intense diplomatic effort, led by the President of Angola, the African Union designated facilitator. The territorial expansion by the sanctioned armed group Movement the 23rd March, M23, with reported external support, and the establishment of de facto administrative structures in the territories controlled by the group coincided with the report of increased support for other armed groups. In addition, the sanctioned entity, Allied Democratic Forces, continue to pose grave threats to the civilian population. Overall discussions during the visit focused on the impact of the sanctions regime, the work of the group of experts, the Luanda and Nairobi processes, the security situation in Eastern Democratic Republic of the Congo, armed group activities and support networks, the illegal exploitation and trade of natural resources, and human rights violations and abuses, including sexual and gender-based violence and violence against children. Throughout my engagement, I reiterated the Security Council's condemnation of all armed groups operating in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, as well as foreign military support provided to M23 and other armed groups, and support provided to armed groups such as the Force Democratique de Libération du Rwanda, FDLR. I reiterated the Council's full support for the mediation effort through the Luanda process, led by the President of Angola, and stressed that sanctions measures are not intended to be an act of coercion, but are envisaged as part of the Council's tools to positively change conflict dynamics. I also reiterated the Council's call for enhanced cooperation between all states, particularly those in the region, and the group of experts pursuant to Resolution 2738. In connection with human rights abuses and violations, it was reported that the ADF, the M23, the Wazalendo groups were the primary perpetrators. Representatives of civil society organizations and internally displaced persons provided dramatic first-hand accounts of attacks against civilians, killings, and the destruction of villages. They recounted their experience of forced displacement and provided detailed accounts about the grave conditions in the IDP camps, including rampant sexual and gender-based violence, also against children. They also noted that belligerent parties installed positions near IDP sites, as a result of which IDPs were often caught in crossfire. The government of the Democratic Republic of the Congo and some civil society actors expressed doubt about the scope of the current sanctions measures in place, suggesting that they did not target decision makers with the ability to meaningfully influence the situation in Eastern Democratic Republic of the Congo. They also pointed to a lack of awareness and understanding of the sanctions measures, emphasizing the need for public sensitization and communication campaigns in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Concerning the implementation of the sanctions regime, the government of the Democratic Republic of the Congo acknowledged challenges in enforcing the sanctions measures stemming from the lack of government control over parts of the country. In addition, the Democratic Republic of the Congo authorities and some civil society representatives pointed out that sanctioned individuals move freely in neighboring countries despite the sanctions imposed on them. The government of Uganda reported that it had no information about the presence of sanctioned individuals in Uganda. The government of Rwanda informed that no activity by sanctioned individuals reportedly residing in Rwanda in connection with the sanctioned entity M23 was known to the authorities. Regarding the Luanda process, I had reports on the harmonized plan for the neutralization of the FDLR and the disengagement of forces, as well as on continued clashes between armed groups despite the 30th July 2024 ceasefire agreement between the Democratic Republic of the Congo and Rwanda. In this connection, various stakeholders throughout the visit expressed support for leveraging sanctions as part of the Security Council's toolkit to accompany and positively influence diplomatic efforts and political processes. On the exploitation of natural resources, various stakeholders in the Democratic Republic of the Congo reported about the systemic extraction, taxation, and transportation of minerals, in particular from the mining site of Rubaya. In Uganda and Rwanda, the authorities inform about their efforts to comply with and implement the relevant traceability and certification mechanisms. Madam President, in closing, I wish to once again thank the government of Angola, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Uganda, and Rwanda for the support extended to the visit, which provided an important opportunity to obtain first-hand accounts concerning the effective implementation of the sanctions measures. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank Ambassador Kanu for his briefing. I now give the floor to those council members who wish to make statements. I give the floor to the representative of France.
Merci, Madame.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I would like to, first of all, the special representative of the Secretary General and our colleague, the permanent representative of Sierra Leone, who's chair of the 1533 Committee, Ambassador Follow, for their briefings. And I would like to express the support of France to MONUSCO. And of course, Ms. Keita. We are meeting, Madam President, as a decisive moment for the region. The conflict in the East has been raging for several decades. In the wake of the taking of Goma and Kavu by the M23, we adopted a resolution, 2673, and imposed sanctions. Today, a peace agreement was signed between the Ministers of Foreign Affairs of the Democratic Republic of the Congo and Rwanda in the presence of the Secretary of State of the United States. France welcomes this step forward. We commend the signatories who have shown political courage. We thank the United States for their decisive contribution to peace in the region. We also welcome the joint efforts that contribute to that, starting with the commitment by the President of Angola, Mr. João Alonso. The Luanda process was decisive for obtaining the result we're witnessing today. It's now up to the Council to encourage this trend with three priorities in mind. First of all, the signing of the peace agreement has to be translated into tangible and visible progress on the ground. And this starts by the cessation of hostilities in a verifiable way that is upheld. This also means the reopening of the airport of Goma to allow comprehensive, safe and unimpeded humanitarian access. This also means moving forward in the implementation of Resolution 2673 and making sure that it's being comprehensively implemented. This also applies to the withdrawal of the Rwanda forces from DRC, stopping the support to the armed groups. And it's important to make sure that MONUSCO can work fully to implement its protection of civilians mandate. Through its presence and its capacity, they're in a position to accompany the implementation of the agreement, and pressures against it have to be ended, as well as impediments to its freedom of movement. Positive signs have been there. We have seen them, and the special representative have described them. Nonetheless, we are hoping that all of the restrictions will be lifted, starting with those restrictions that have to do with the troops. The attacks against blue helmets are unacceptable and can be considered war crimes. We also have to make sure that there is follow-up on the commitments to make sure that there is lasting peace in DRC and in the region. We are determined to work in this way together with the AU mediator, President of Togo, Mr. Gnassingbé, and the co-facilitators, and with the United States and Qatar, and all of the actors committed to the success of the various dialogue processes. We support the convergence and coordination amongst these initiatives, as well as a central role by the United Nations. And finally, civil society remains a major actor, as has been shown by the contribution of the churches to the internal Congolese dialogue. Several peace agreements in the region, Madam, have failed in the past. We have to make sure that the current process is a success, that it allows an effective ending of the crisis, that it's done in a lasting fashion. And we welcome the advances made by the DRC and Rwanda towards an agreement. And I welcome the presence of the delegations of the DRC and Rwanda here at this meeting of ours today. We're discussing this issue. There is no military solution to the conflict in the Great Lakes region, and we hope that everyone will rise up to this ambitious goal. And the Council has to continue encouraging that. In the upcoming months, we have to be following the agreement and the commitments undertaken, making sure we follow everything, including what is happening to MONUSCO. We will continue being committed to the sovereignty of the territorial integrity of the DRC and towards peace and stability throughout the region. I thank you.
Thank the representative of France for his statement, and I give the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, President. Let me start by thanking SOSG Cater for briefing us today. I also thank the permanent representative of Sierra Leone for his briefing on behalf of the 1533 Committee, and I welcome the participation of the permanent representatives of the DRC and Rwanda. President, let me make 3 points. First, the UK commends efforts by the African Union, United States, and Qatar to negotiate a peaceful resolution to the conflict, and also commends the continued engagement of the DRC and Rwanda. DRC and Rwandan foreign ministers have been meeting today in Washington to sign a peace agreement. The UK welcomes this significant step forward on the road to a durable peace. Focus will now rightly turn to its swift implementation, and the UK stands ready to support this process. Second, the UK remains deeply concerned by the M23's continued obstruction of MONUSCO's ability to deliver its mandate. We thank SOSG Cater for her continued engagement with the Security Council on this issue. Though the M23 released MONUSCO fuel trucks earlier this month, the UK emphasises that all restrictions affecting the delivery of MONUSCO's mandate should be lifted immediately, in line with Resolution 2773, which was adopted unanimously by this Council. Third, the UK is concerned by the humanitarian crisis and significant protection challenges in Eastern DRC. We remain committed to supporting the most vulnerable. To this end, my Foreign Secretary announced an uplift of over $18 million in UK support to the humanitarian response in Eastern DRC during his visit to Kinshasa earlier this year. We are also alarmed by the continued reports of summary executions and sexual violence. According to UNICEF, a child is reportedly raped every half hour in Eastern DRC. We urge all parties to uphold their obligations under international humanitarian law, including the protection of civilians and humanitarian access. President, it is time for diplomacy to deliver a long-term solution to conflicts in the Great Lakes region. We now urge Rwanda and the DRC to engage in good faith on the implementation of the peace agreement in order to bring about a more secure and prosperous future, one which the region has long worked towards with the support of MONUSCO, and one which the people of the DRC greatly deserve. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom for his statement, and I give the floor to the representative of China.
Yeah. Madam President, I thank SRSG Cater and Ambassador Kanu, Chair of the DRC Sanctions Committee, for their briefings. I welcome the presence of representatives of DRC and Rwanda at today's meeting. For some time now, the international community and the regional countries have continued their diplomatic efforts towards resolving the issue of Eastern DRC, but the situation in the region remains complex and fragile. In this connection, I wish to make the following points. First, there must be an effective ceasefire and stop of violence. According to the report of Secretary General Guterres, the conflict in North Kivu and South Kivu is still going on with widespread violence against the civilians. China calls on all parties to the conflict to fully implement Security Council Resolution 2773 by achieving an effective ceasefire and stop of violence, ending the attacks and the violations against the civilians, especially women and children, and protecting civilians and their property. Second, there must be a commitment to sincere dialogue and negotiations. China welcomes the ongoing peace dialogue between DRC and Rwanda and takes note of the peace agreement signed by the two sides. China commends AU, EAC, SADC, and other sub-regional organizations for their long-standing efforts to ease the situation and supports the continued mediation role of regional mechanisms. Countries outside of the region should be genuinely committed to peace in Eastern DRC and refrain from taking advantage of the situation for their own interests. Third, every effort must be made to alleviate the humanitarian crisis. The ongoing conflict in eastern DRC has displaced more than 1 million people, forcing large numbers of refugees into repeated displacement and leaving them without reliable access to food, water, and other basic necessities. The humanitarian funding shortfall has further exacerbated the situation on the ground. China urges the M23 and other relevant parties to unconditionally guarantee humanitarian access and to reopen Goma and Kavumu airports and other critical access routes as soon as possible. The international community should step up its humanitarian assistance to the region, provide the population with basic necessities, and support the rehabilitation of infrastructure, including educational and medical facilities damaged during the conflict. Fourth, mandate the implementation by the peacekeepers must be guaranteed. According to the UN Secretariat, MONUSCO has faced severe restrictions on fuel imports and personnel movement. As MONUSCO is a peacekeeping operation authorized by the Security Council, China calls on the relevant parties to fully lift the relevant obstacles and to provide maximum facilitation for the implementation of the mission's mandate. China notes SRSG Keita's recent visit to Goma for consultations with relevant parties and will continue to support her and the relevant UN agencies in their work. Madam President, not long ago, the ministerial meeting of coordinators on the implementation of the follow-up actions of the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation was held in China, during which Foreign Minister Wang Yi met with foreign ministers of DRC and Rwanda respectively to exchange views on the situation in eastern DRC and actively work to facilitate peace talks. China stands ready to continue working with the international community towards an early end to the conflict and the restoration of peace and tranquility in eastern DRC. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of China for his statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Sierra Leone.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the A3 Plus members, Algeria, Guyana, Somalia, and my own country, Sierra Leone. We thank the Special Representative of the Secretary General, Madam Bintou Keita, for an informative and comprehensive briefing on the situation in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, and we acknowledge the report of the Secretary General. We welcome the participation of the DRC in today's meeting and warmly congratulate our sisterly country on its election as a non-permanent member of this Council for the 2026-2027 term. We also welcome the participation of Rwanda in this meeting. Madam President, we are meeting at a very critical moment for the conflict in Eastern DRC. The Secretary General's report underscores the evolving security, political, and humanitarian challenges facing the country. At the same time, we acknowledge the significant efforts being made to stabilize the situation on the ground. Since the Security Council last met to consider the situation in Eastern DRC, there have been notable developments towards peace and stability. In this context, allow me to highlight the following 5 points. First, we express our strong support for and solidarity with the brave men and women serving with MONUSCO under the UN flag in an extremely challenging operational environment. We urge this Council and all regional and international partners to ensure that MONUSCO personnel are fully supported and empowered to carry out the mandate entrusted to them by this Council. In this regard, we welcome SRSG Keita's leadership in a recent visit to Goma and a direct engagement with the MONUSCO personnel. Continued support to MONUSCO is essential for effective mandate implementation. We commend our proactive engagement with the leadership of M23 AFC during that visit. Dialogue with relevant parties remains a critical pathway to peace. We also commend the role of the International Committee of the Red Cross in facilitating dialogue between MONUSCO and M23 AFC as part of a broader effort to alleviate the humanitarian situation. We welcome the safe departure of over 1,500 FARDC and PNC personnel from Goma, which the efforts of the ICRC helped to facilitate. Second, the A3 Plus welcomes and commends the constructive role of the United States in bringing together the DRC and Rwanda for the signing of a peace agreement. We equally express appreciation to the State of Qatar for its facilitation of dialogue, including between the two leaders. We acknowledge and commend the efforts of His Excellency President Flore Nassimbe, President of Togo, in his capacity as the African Union appointed mediator for the DRC Rwanda engagement, supported by the panel of 5 former African presidents who are serving as peace facilitators. We further recognize the valuable contributions of other countries supporting a peaceful resolution of the conflict in Eastern DRC. We are hopeful that the signing of today's peace agreement will inject renewed momentum into the pursuit of peace and stability in the region. We urge both the DRC and Rwanda governments to remain steadfast in their commitment and to build on this progress. Third, the A3 Plus is encouraged by emerging momentum towards an inter-Congolese dialogue aimed at addressing the root causes of the conflict. However, we remain concerned by the continued shrinking of the political space, which risks undermining efforts to build national cohesion and trust among political actors. We call for inclusive and positive engagement with all stakeholders in the DRC. In this regard, we acknowledge the important role of the National Episcopal Conference of Congo, SENCO, in fostering national dialogue. Fourth, we note the recent visit of the Chief of Defense Staff of the Uganda military and his engagement with his Congolese counterpart to advance their joint operation against the Allied Democratic Forces. While M23 AFC often dominates focus, the ADF, with its link to a global terrorist network, continues to inflict violence and suffering on civilians in Ituri and Northern Kivu. Continued collaboration between Uganda and the DRC remains critical to addressing this threat. Fifth and finally, we reiterate our deep concern about the worsening humanitarian situation in the DRC. Ongoing violence by armed groups has left over 10 million people facing acute food insecurity, while humanitarian actors encounter severe access constraints. We appeal to the international community to urgently support the humanitarian response plan, which remains critically underfunded. The A3 Plus reminds all parties that international humanitarian law imposes clear obligations to protect civilians during armed conflict. We urge all actors to fully respect international humanitarian and human rights law. In particular, we call on the M23 AFC to allow unimpeded access for MONUSCO and humanitarian organizations. We further call on the international community to scale up its support to humanitarian operations in the DRC. In conclusion, Madam President, following the signing of today's peace agreement between the DRC and Rwanda, the A3 Plus urges all parties to uphold their commitment and continue on the path towards durable peace and security in the DRC. We reaffirm our full solidarity with the people of the DRC and their inalienable rights to live in peace within their own country. We further reiterate our call for the full respect of the sovereignty and territorial integrity and independence of the DRC and all states in the region. And I thank you.
I thank the representative of Sierra Leone for his statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Panama.
Muchas gracias, Presidente.
Thank you, Madam President. Distinguished colleagues, allow me to begin by conveying our gratitude to the Special Representative of the Secretary-General, Ms. Bintou Keita. We thank her for her report. We also wish to thank all MONUSCO personnel. They, with great commitment, continue to forge ahead with their work in an incredibly challenging context. We also thank the Ambassador of Sierra Leone for briefing us on the situation on the ground and his work as chair of the 1533 committee. We convey our concern at the persistent conflict in the east of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Communities, particularly women, girls, and boys, continue to suffer the devastating consequences of violence, forced displacement, and of systematic violations of human rights. In this connection, we must say that the situation is alarming because extortions, looting, abduction, and widespread sexual violence have all been documented. Moreover, the crisis is being exacerbated by the forced recruitment of minors and by grave violations of international humanitarian law. Moreover, the country is facing multiple overlapping emergencies which further worsen the situation. The torrential rainfall in April sparked flooding in Kinshasa, floods which caused the deaths of at least 165 people and thousands of other victims. In May, heavy flooding in Fisi claimed more than 100 lives and left countless homes destroyed. The food crisis is equally catastrophic. Around 28 million Congolese people are facing acute food insecurity. This is the highest figure ever recorded in the country. This overview paints a picture of a situation which demands immediate attention. As such, we hail the diplomatic progress between the government of the DRC, M23, and Rwanda, progress facilitated by Qatar and supported by the United States. We recognize the leadership of President João Lourenço of Angola, leadership of the Luanda process, and the appointment of Faure Nasibe of Togo as the African Union mediator. We also applaud the provisional agreement reached between the Democratic Republic of Congo and Rwanda. This agreement tackles territorial integrity, the prohibition of hostilities, and the disarmament of non-state armed groups. However, the journey towards peace will have to begin with an immediate and unconditional cessation of hostilities. We urge all parties to uphold Resolution 2773 of this Council and to comply with international humanitarian law. Peace cannot be built whilst attacks against civilians rage on, alongside the forced recruitment of minors and restrictions on the work of MINUSCO. President, Panama expresses its concern at the restrictions placed on the freedom of movement and supply of MONUSCO in areas controlled by M23. These restrictions not only imperil the blue helmets and humanitarian personnel, they also affect how well we are able to protect the civilian population. We urge M23 to lift these restrictions and to assist the mission in discharging its mandate. We also urge them to facilitate the reopening of the Goma and Kavumu airports and to facilitate unfettered humanitarian access. We encourage political leaders and Congolese civil society to engage in an open, constructive dialogue, one that is respectful and one which leads to sustainable, inclusive solutions. We support the swift adoption of the bill against tribalism, racism, and xenophobia, and we commend efforts undertaken to implement the law on the rights of indigenous peoples. Moreover, we categorically reject the spread of disinformation and hate speech. These phenomena not only cause the social fabric to fray, but rather they also make it more difficult for MONUSCO to discharge its mandate. Madam President, we take note of the fact that the planning of the withdrawal from areas under M23 control has suspended, and we also note the reprogramming and rechanneling of activities towards community protection, the monitoring of human rights, and assistance to vulnerable populations. To conclude, I wish to reiterate our commitment to a gradual, responsible, and sustainable withdrawal on MONUSCO's part, a withdrawal which leaves no security vacuums and which doesn't jeopardize the progress reached. Once again, we thank you for your work and your sacrifice in the DRC. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Panama for his statement, and I give the floor to the representative of the Republic of Korea.
Thank you, President. I also thank SRSG Keita for her informative briefing and Ambassador Kano for his briefing on the visit of the 1533 committee. I also welcome the representative of the Democratic Republic of Congo and Rwanda to today's meeting. The situation in the Eastern DRC stands at a critical juncture with the encouraging diplomatic efforts taking place amid persistent insecurity and dire humanitarian challenges. Let me highlight the 4 points. First, Republic of Korea welcomes and supports ongoing diplomatic efforts aimed at achieving a political solution to the conflict in Eastern DRC. Today's signing of the peace agreement between the DRC and Rwanda, witnessed by the United States, represents a significant step toward ending hostilities and securing long-term peace and stability in the region. The facilitation by Qatar in April between the DRC and M23 also paved the way to addressing underlying issues of this conflict. We also look forward to the continued engagement of the AU designated mediator, President Nasangbe, and the 5-member panel of the EAC and SADC co-facilitators. We hope their efforts will yield tangible progress in enhancing coordination and coherence among various actors supporting peace in Eastern DRC. To this end, complementarity and alignment among all these diplomatic efforts would be essential to ensure a successful resolution of this conflict. We also call on both DRC and Rwanda to fully uphold their commitments made through these diplomatic efforts. This brings me to my second point, the deeply concerning and persistent insecurity in Eastern DRC despite such encouraging developments. The security situation in the periphery of the Goma continues to remain volatile as M23 carries out atrocious activities to consolidate control over its occupied areas. The situation in Grand Nord and Ituri is no more different, with the ADF, Codeco, Jair continuing to pose a significant threat to the civilians. The violence by all parties involved has resulted in an alarming scale of human rights abuses and violations as confirmed in recent findings of the OHCHR fact-finding mission. The use of sexual violence as a weapon of war, particularly against children, reportedly at the rate of 1 child every 30 minutes, is horrifying. Moreover, the spread of hate speech based on physical appearance is a dangerous signal of deeper ethnic divisions and erosion of national cohesion. We strongly urge all parties to respect their obligation under international humanitarian law and human rights law. We also record that Resolution 2773 still remains to be fully implemented by all parties. Third, we emphasize the importance of the fully ensuring MONUSCO's implementation of its mandate. For nearly 6 months, MONUSCO's ability to carry out this mandate has been seriously undermined in areas under M23 control. The mission has been denied the freedom of movement and access to regular supplies, endangering the safety and security of the peacekeepers. Nevertheless, it has made tireless efforts to remain resilient and adapt to these challenging conditions, including by establishing a temporary force headquarters in Beni. We are hopeful that the recent positive developments will lead to a swift normalization of the MONUSCO's operational environment, enabling the mission to continue playing a pivotal role in promoting peace and stability in Eastern DRC. Lastly, international humanitarian assistance should be urgently scaled up to support millions of the displaced persons in DRC. The sharp decline in humanitarian funding is deepening the already dire situation, with over 10 million people facing acute food insecurity and rapid surge in epidemic outbreaks. The Republic of Korea has contributed more than $225 million in ODA over past 25 years in support of the peace, stability, and sustainable development in the DRC, and we plan to continue sustaining these efforts. In conclusion, Madam President, Republic of Korea reaffirms its steadfast commitment for the DRC, MONUSCO, SRSG Keita, and all regional and international diplomatic efforts aimed at achieving a peaceful resolution to the conflict in Eastern DRC during this critical moment. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the Republic of Korea for his statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Greece.
Thank you, Madam President. I would like to thank SRSG Mrs. Keita for her briefing, and also the Permanent Representative of Sierra Leone in his capacity as chair of the 1533 Committee. I also welcome the participation of the representatives of the Democratic Republic of the Congo and of Rwanda to our meeting. Madam President, allow me to emphasize the following 3 points. First, the implementation of Resolution 2773 is imperative. M23 must immediately and unconditionally cease hostilities and withdraw from Goma, Bukavu, and all other controlled areas. Greece resolutely opposes any violation of international law and the UN Charter and stresses a strong commitment to the sovereignty, independence, unity, and territorial integrity of the DRC. Second, we welcome today's signing of the peace agreement between DRC and Rwanda and Washington, and we commend the US facilitation efforts to achieve this agreement. We also commend all other recent peace efforts, notably those by the AU designated mediator and the 5 co-facilitators, as well as the efforts by Qatar, which led to the immediate ceasefire. Third, the Resolution 2773 reiterates the Council's full support to MONUSCO, which is acting within its mandate and is doing critical work at the DRC, in particular protecting the civilians, ensuring continued implementation of the MRM on children and armed conflict, and addressing urgent needs. MONUSCO's movement should be unobstructed and its work should be unimpeded. All parties must respect international humanitarian law and ensure unrestricted humanitarian access. We emphasize one more our strong commitment to the safety and security of MONUSCO's personnel. Lastly, we are deeply concerned about the grave humanitarian security consequences of the continuing M23 offensive, both in North and South Kivu, that have led to a further mounting increase of IDPs. We strongly condemn all forms of human rights violations committed both by armed groups and state agents, as presented in the SG report, abuses, violence against civilians, peacekeeping, humanitarian and medical personnel, sexual and gender-based violence, and human trafficking. We are particularly concerned about the grave violations and abuses committed against children, human rights, notably large-scale recruitment and use of children, abductions, killing and maiming, and shocking levels of sexual violence, as UNICEF stated to this Council last April. All continuing verified grave violations and abuses committed against children must halt, and all parties must uphold the obligations under international humanitarian law and international human rights law. Women and girls, being the main victims of the conflict, need to have unobstructed access to justice. We welcome the steps taken by the DRC government to hold perpetrators of grave violations against women and children accountable. Madam President, aligning with today's WPS Shared Commitments Group statement, we stress that the meaningful political engagement of women and the solidarity and advocacy at regional, national, and international efforts are key elements for sustainable peace, stability, and developments in the DRC. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Greece for his statement, and I give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Madam President, we would like to thank the Special Representative of the Secretary General, Bintou Keita, and the Permanent Representative of Sierra Leone, the Chair of the Security Council 1533 Committee, Mr. Michael Kanu. We thank them for their briefings. We also welcome the participation of the representatives of DRC and Rwanda in our meeting today. First of all, we would like to note the signing today of the Ministers of Foreign Affairs of DRC and Rwanda, the signing of the agreement to cease fire. It's indeed a very important event, which we'll hope will lead to lasting peace and stability in the region in the wake of 6 months of active hostilities in the east of the DRC. I'd like to recall here that as a result of that, since the beginning of this year, thousands of Congolese citizens have died and hundreds of thousands have become IDPs, most of them repeatedly. The number of people who fled the eastern of Congo into neighboring countries, Burundi, Uganda, Republic of Congo, Tanzania, and Zambia, is in excess of 140,000 people. Millions of people still need medical and food assistance, and this is a price that the ordinary Congolese had to pay for military escalation. Madam President, in February, members of the Security Council unanimously passed resolution number 2773, which contains the main conditions needed for the settlement of the conflict and the relevant demand placed on parties. The Security Council has not yet seen the content of the document signed today, but it is our view that it is based on the key provisions of that resolution, and the implementation of that by Rwanda and the DRC has always been the shortest path towards the end of hostilities and working out viable and sustainable parameters for peaceful agreements. For a long time, they were being ignored in both countries, and we do hope that now Kigali and Kinshasa will finally heed these appeals and will do the will of the Council. Madam President, It's important that the key elements of Resolution 2073 are based on the regional recipes worked out within the framework of the Luanda and Nairobi processes, and also on the joint platform provided by EAC SADC. And this is a direct projection of the principles of African solutions to African problems. We welcome the efforts made by President Lorenzo, President of Togo Nasimba, in trying to find ways of settling the crisis in the east of DRC. It's important to make sure that the international mediators, when they provide their good offices, that they take into account fully the concerns of the parties to the crisis in Congo and the position of African leaders when it comes to the parameters on how to eradicate its root causes. Madam President, the escalation of the crisis also very seriously impacted on the capacity of the UN stabilization mission in the DRC to implement their mandate effectively. For 6 months now, the peacekeepers have been coexisting with the M23 in those areas which are occupied by the M23. The situation of the MONUSCO staff in Goma and its surroundings is a very good illustration of the fact that this status quo has exhausted itself. And we expect that the Secretariat, UN Secretariat, will come up with proposals as regards to prospects of missions' future deployment. I would like to underscore here that Russia continues consistently supporting the mission and its leadership, especially under current circumstances. In conclusion, we would like to congratulate our Congolese colleagues on having their country elected to be a member of the Council for the upcoming 2-year period. We have no doubt that they will bring in their valuable contribution to the workings of the Council, first and foremost, take into account their experience of interacting with the United Nations and helping implementing Security Council resolutions in the area of peacekeeping. Russia will continue advocating the settlement of the conflict in the eastern DRC on the basis of the UN Charter and unconditional respect for the sovereignty, territorial integrity, and the independence of the country. We are convinced that ultimately the states of the region will show political wisdom and will be able to, in action, show their commitment to implementing the mutually accepted obligations they officially undertook today. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for her statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Pakistan.
Thank you, Madam President. We are grateful to SRSG Bintu Kaita for her briefing and leadership of the mission during this difficult time. We also thank Ambassador Michael Kanu for his remarks as chair of the 1533 committee. We welcome the participation of representatives of the DRC and Rwanda in the meeting. Madam President, Pakistan welcomes the diplomatic breakthroughs to bring an end to the conflict in eastern DRC, including today's signing of the peace agreement between DRC and Rwanda, brokered through a commendable effort of the United States. The 23rd April joint statement by DRC and M23, facilitated by an equally commendable effort of Qatar, and the African Union's sterling mediation efforts, led by President Gnassingbé of Togo and President Lorenzo of Angola, the AU chair. We hope that these diplomatic efforts will bear fruit and the agreements will be implemented to bring lasting peace in Eastern DRC. There is an ever-present expectation that addressing the root causes of this conflict is important for sustainable peace. Tangible progress towards peace, as a first step, requires an immediate and unconditional ceasefire and effective implementation of this Council's Resolution 2773. Madam President, we have noted the recent interactions between MONUSCO and M23. We hope that the severe restrictions imposed on MONUSCO's freedom of movement and resupply by AFC and M23 will be lifted. These restrictions have critically hampered implementation of the mission's mandate, endangered the safety and security of peacekeepers, and delayed troop rotations. We believe MONUSCO has an important role in protecting civilians and sustaining ceasefire in DRC. We urge the immediate reopening of Goma and Kavumu airports, end to the detention and harassment of UN personnel, and lifting of all movement restrictions on peacekeepers. Pakistan recalls that attacks on UN peacekeepers constitute war crimes. We commend the resilience of MONUSCO peacekeepers They have made great personal sacrifices for the maintenance of international peace and security and for the stability of DRC. We salute them. Madam President, we also take note of the dire humanitarian situation in DRC, which has worsened because of the security environment and the drop in funding support. We call on the international community to ensure that the humanitarian needs of the population are fully met. Lastly, Pakistan reaffirms its steadfast support for the sovereignty, unity, and territorial integrity of the Democratic Republic of Congo and hopes for an early return of normalcy in the country. I thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of Pakistan for his statement, and I give the floor to the representative of the United States.
Thank you, Madam President. And thank you, Special Representative Bintu Keita, for your briefing today and for the work of you and your team on the ground. I also welcome the representatives of Rwanda and the DRC who are with us today. Colleagues, in the 3 months since our last briefing, we have been witness to extreme violence and hardship in Eastern DRC. But we are starting to see glimmers of hope, and today have genuine reason for optimism. President, just hours ago in Washington, D.C., the foreign ministers of the DRC and Rwanda signed a peace agreement based on mutual respect for sovereignty, territorial integrity, human rights, and international humanitarian law, and founded on the prospect of shared prosperity through regional economic integration. This development is a major accomplishment. It supports African-led processes and represents an historic step towards securing durable peace in Eastern DRC and creating the conditions for economic development for the benefit of the people in the region. Just as the causes of this 30-year conflict are complex, the solutions are intricate and layered. Today's agreement weaves together complementary regional and international initiatives that will be essential to successful implementation. We thank the African Union and Togo for leading regional diplomatic efforts, and we thank Qatar for leading negotiations between the DRC and M23. While we celebrate today's diplomatic breakthrough between the DRC and Rwanda, we recall that the situation on the ground across Eastern DRC remains highly volatile. Violent conflict and humanitarian crises are ongoing as armed groups continue to sow instability in the region and beyond. Against this challenging backdrop, MONUSCO has remained a constant and constructive presence, one that continues to make life-saving contributions to the security of Eastern DRC through unparalleled expertise, analysis, and access. But, Madam President, obstruction of MONUSCO directly undermines these contributions. We call on the parties to abide by their agreement to support, facilitate, and promote MONUSCO's ability to carry out its mandate. We regret that for nearly 2 months, M23 blocked MONUSCO from accessing fuel and that it has continued to prevent MONUSCO from rotating its troops. Now more than ever, to support implementation of the peace agreement, MONUSCO must be empowered and enabled to execute the tasks that we, the Security Council, have given it. We laud the delicate operation resulting in the transfer of 1,000 Congolese military and police under MONUSCO's protection in Goma since January. We also recognize MONUSCO's direct interventions to protect civilians and support peace in Ituri province and in the Grand Nord. Madam President, the United States is proud to have supported the parties in securing today's peace agreement, a testament to the priority we place on African-led processes. This agreement joins a growing list of peace deals negotiated by President Trump and his administration, including Iran, Israel, and India, Pakistan, and we look forward to promoting future negotiations that bring about an end to unnecessary human suffering. As we recognize this momentous step toward regional cohesion and lasting stability for the benefit of the Great Lakes region, let us work together to see it through to full implementation. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the United States for her statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Denmark.
Thank you, Madam President. And let me join others in thanking you, Special Representative Keita, for your briefing, and through you, the men and women of MONUSCO, who are operating under extremely difficult circumstances and whose efforts we highly admire and support. We also thank Ambassador Kanu for his 1533 chair statement. Madam President, the situation in Eastern DRC remains critical. Allow me to raise 4 key points. First, Denmark welcomes the signing of the peace agreement today between the DRC and Rwanda and facilitated by the United States. Like others, we express our hope that the parties will continue to engage in good faith to ensure the successful implementation of this agreement. Similarly, we remain hopeful that the parties will engage meaningfully in the ongoing talks in Doha. It is important that all ongoing talks feed into and naturally support the process led by the President of Togo as the African Union appointed mediator in the conflict. We encourage the active support of the countries in the Great Lakes region in this regard. As we've said before, there's no military solution to this conflict, only a political one that is inclusive and representative of all Congolese society. We urge the meaningful participation in these talks of women, civil society, and diverse groups in the Congolese society. Second, Madam President, as we look ahead, we must not forget that the civilians in the area under M23 control in North and South Kivu had paid and continue to pay the heaviest price in this conflict. The findings of the OHCHR fact-finding mission in DRC are deeply troubling, with reports of severe human rights violations, from widespread arbitrary arrests and enforced disappearances to sexual and gender-based violence. Those who speak out, including human rights defenders, journalists, and civil society, are particularly threatened. We condemn such acts and support all efforts to hold the perpetrators accountable. Impunity for grave crimes must end and accountability be ensured. We welcome MONUSCO's contribution in this regard. Third, Madam President, these worrying developments are taking place against the backdrop of a deepening humanitarian crisis. The sharp escalation of violence, coupled with funding cuts, humanitarian restrictions, and looting of humanitarian and medical facilities have further exacerbated civilian suffering. Concretely, this means that the survivors of sexual and gender-based violence are not able to get the care they need across North and South Kivu. It also means that preventable diseases, including polio and measles, could rapidly spread, including beyond the borders of DRC. We reiterate that all parties must uphold international humanitarian law and respect humanitarian principles, including by restoring basic services and allowing the full, safe, immediate and unhindered access of humanitarian aid and medical personnel to reach the millions in need. Finally, Madam President, we express our deep concern about the obstructions of MONUSCO's operations. The continued closure of Goma Airport hinders the delivery of humanitarian aid and goods, troop rotation, and the ability to evacuate civilians and UN staff. We remind all parties of their humanitarian obligations. We urge M23 to lift all restrictions on MONUSCO and refrain from actions which prevent the mission from discharging its mandate or endanger the safety and security of UN personnel. Such obstructions are in clear violation of Resolution 2773 and may constitute basis for sanctions designations pursuant to Security Council resolutions. Madam President, let me conclude by reiterating our call on Rwanda to withdraw its troops from the Eastern DRC and end its support to M23, and our call to the DRC to neutralize the FDLR and counter hate speech. We express our full support to MONUSCO, mandated by this Council to protect civilians as its primary task and to assist the DRC government in its path towards stability. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Denmark for her statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Slovenia.
Thank you, Madam President. I express my sincere appreciation to SRSG Keita for her comprehensive briefing and the clarity of her message to this Council. I also thank the 1533 Chair. And we also welcome the participation of the representatives of the Democratic Republic of the Congo and Rwanda to this meeting. We are deeply concerned by the ongoing conditions under which MONUSCO is operating in M23 occupied areas, as highlighted in the latest report by the Secretary General. The advanced notification requirements, the imposition of restrictions and fees on the delivery of vital goods, especially fuel, constraints on the movement of supplies, and the impediments placed on uniformed personnel, all of this is unacceptable. This Council has made it clear in Resolution 2773 that any attempts to undermine MONUSCO's ability to implement its mandate will not be tolerated. M23 must lift, without delay, all impediments to MONUSCO's operations. While we acknowledge recent reported indications of willingness to ease certain measures, these steps fall short of what is required. Additional strain posed by delays in the rotation of contingents further complicates the mission's ability to effectively implement its mandate. In this regard, we note MONUSCO's engagement with AFC M23, including SRSG's Keita recent visit to Goma, as part of ongoing efforts to address challenges and help facilitate the reopening of Goma Airport. We commend the mission's efforts to reinforce security around its bases, safeguard its personnel, and protect unarmed civilians sheltering on its premises. Madam President, we are encouraged by the increased momentum in mediation processes and initiatives led by the region, the US, Qatar, the AU-appointed mediator, and other partners towards durable peace in the Eastern DRC and the wider Great Lakes region. We commend the DRC and Rwanda for their engagement towards peace, resulting in today's signing of the peace agreement under the US-led mediation, which we welcome. We commend both countries for these steps. Moving forward, it will remain important to build on them. Sustained political and diplomatic engagement to address the root causes and the presence of armed groups will lay the foundation for long-term stability and security while respecting sovereignty and territorial integrity of all states, including the DRC. We emphasize the need and recognize efforts to align and coordinate mediation initiatives to complement peace building and to provide unified support for the effective implementation of agreements reached. Madam President, while much of the attention is focused on the situation in and around Goma, we remain concerned that M23, with the support of the Rwanda Defense Forces, continues to expand its territorial presence in South Kivu and deepen its administrative control over occupied areas. We also remain alarmed by persistent reports of human rights violations and abuses perpetrated not only by M23, but by other armed groups in Eastern DRC, particularly the ADF, Codeco, Zaire, and the FDLR. And we note with grave concern the emergence of new armed groups. We remain concerned also by the conflict's toll on civilians, especially women and children, and the rising threat of conflict-related sexual violence. We condemn all such violence. As noted also in the latest report, the humanitarian crisis in the DRC remains among the world's most acute. Conflict has been the main driver of food insecurity in the DRC. It is essential that relief operations receive full support and are able to deliver aid safely and without obstruction. We reiterate once again, humanitarian personnel and facilities must never be targeted, and we remind all parties of their binding obligations under international humanitarian law. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Slovenia for her statement, and I give the floor now to the representative of the Democratic Republic of the Congo.
Merci.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, as we move to the end of your term as Security Council President, my delegation has the pleasure and the honor of congratulating you on the excellent work done throughout your mandate. And we wish to express our satisfaction to you at seeing a friendly country, Guyana, presiding over this Security Council briefing on the situation in my country, the Democratic Republic of the Congo. I wish to take this opportunity to pay a tribute to the Secretary General of the United Nations, His Excellency Mr. Antonio Guterres, for his steadfast commitment to restoring peace in my country. Allow me also to welcome here among us Ms. Bintou Keita, Special Representative of the Secretary General and Head of MONUSCO. I wish to thank her for her clarity and the relevance of the information with which we have just been furnished. Madam President, my delegation has taken note of the Secretary General's report on the United Nations Organization Stabilization Mission in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, issued as document S/2025/403 and dated the 20th of June 2025. Your Council is seized of that report. Its content raises remarks and concerns on the part of my delegation, and I wish to share those with you now. To begin, we must underscore that the security situation in the eastern region of my country remains characterized by the continuation of the Rwandan aggression. The troops deployed in support of the AFC/M23 elements continues to be illustrated by the massacres of civilians, the raping of women and young girls, forced recruitment of young boys, and other violations of human rights and international humanitarian law. The latter seen namely through the impediments placed on the reopening of humanitarian corridors and the international airports of Goma and Bukavu. On the ground, the Congolese people living in the eastern and southern regions of the DRC are not able to physically reach their brothers in Goma, Bukavu, Rutshuru, Bunaga, and their brothers there continue to buckle under the yoke of occupation. The RDF M23 AFC coalition continues its headlong rush to expand and is conquering territory, expanding its reach in Luinja, Kaziba, Katoga, and Twaginza, while at the same time threatening the city of Uvira, sitting on the border with Burundi in South Kivu. This reprehensible expansion is being conducted in flagrant violation of the relevant provisions of operational paragraphs 2 and 8 of Resolution 2773. What's more, this partnership continues to strengthen the establishment of a parallel administration by appointing new authorities in Goma in North Kivu and Bukavu in South Kivu. However, 5 months ago, almost to the day, this Council unanimously and with one voice adopted Resolution 2773 on the 21st of February 2025. That resolution was adopted to demand Rwanda and their proxies of M23/AFC to withdraw their troops from the DRC's territory. It also demanded the lifting of the defense measures installed by Rwanda. These grave violations of the territorial integrity of the DRC continue in a climate of absolute impunity, even following Rwanda's signature of the Washington Declaration of Principles on the 25th of April 2025. This morning, Rwanda signed, with the mediation of the American administration and with the state of Qatar as a witness, the peace agreement between the Democratic Republic of the Congo and Rwanda. In that agreement, Rwanda commits to withdrawing unconditionally all of its troops from DRC's territory. We hope that this time, the United States of America, responsible for mediation, will be able to impose sanctions on Rwanda commensurate with their misconduct if they again fail to comply. To put a lasting end to the impunity which is fueling this recurrent violence, my delegation calls upon the Secretary General to support the Commission of Inquiry created by the Human Rights Council of the United Nations during its 37th special session held on the 7th of February 2025. The goal of that commission was to investigate massive human rights violations and international humanitarian law violations violations currently underway in the provinces of North and South Kivu. The Commission is also called upon to investigate the violations perpetrated in the cities of Goma and Bukavu following their invasion by the RDF AFC M23 coalition. The prosecution of these crimes in the courts will contribute to a sustainable process of national reconciliation and to the buttressing of the peace process, because it will put an end to the widespread impunity in the east of the DRC. The lack of resources and the fact it is impossible for the various working groups to correctly function is something that has been decried by High Commissioner for Human Rights, Volker Turk. And this state of affairs does not augur well for the victims awaiting reparations. Madam President, on the political and diplomatic front, the President of the Republic, His Excellency Félix Tshisekedi Chilombo, continues to demonstrate his spirit of openness and dialogue. Since the beginning of the Luanda and Nairobi processes this Doha talks, the signing of the Washington Declaration of Principles in April last, and during the signing this morning, of the peace agreement between the DRC and Rwanda, the President's desire to find a diplomatic solution has remained unyielding. These diplomatic endeavors have also been buttressed by domestic efforts. Beyond the presence of DRC delegates at the Doha negotiations, the President of the Republic also domestically has embarked upon the dialogue and several rounds of consultations. Proof of this was a hearing with an eminent member of the opposition a few days ago. We've also seen meetings between the President and the representatives of various faiths in order to explore the ways and means of restoring peace and social cohesion. Madam President, the establishment of a bespoke strategy for a gradual, responsible and sustainable withdrawal of MONUSCO, bearing in mind the evolution of the conflict's dynamics and protection risks, was not submitted to the Security Council by the recommended deadline of the 31st of March 2024. That submission was affected and delayed by the worsening of the security situation in the east of the DRC. It has worsened since the beginning of January 2025. On the 2nd of May, the Congolese government and MONUSCO submitted to the Security Council a joint note entitled "On the Transition in South Kivu and the Disengagement of MONUSCO." For my government, the roadmap for the MONUSCO's disengagement, which is currently suspended, could be resumed as soon as conditions allow. Elsewhere, given the realities on the ground and in view of the fact that MONUSCO may be given additional responsibilities, which could be a fact rendered inevitable by how things might play out in Eastern DRC, we urge the Council to strengthen MONUSCO so it can properly deliver on any additional mandate entrusted to it. Allow me to pay a tribute to the soldiers of the Sami RDC force and the whole of the SADC community for the sacrifices made and the support that they have provided at a difficult moment of my country's history. The decision taken to withdraw this force by heads of state and government of SADC, who met at an extraordinary summit on the 13th of March 2025, put an end to the Sami DRC mission. It also put an end to MONUSCO's obligations to extend logistical and operational support to this SADC mission. Those obligations arose from Resolution 2746 of the 6th of August 2024. President, paragraphs 45 to 49 of the Secretary General's report depict a devastating humanitarian situation. In practice, the Humanitarian Response Plan for 2025, which was launched on the 27th of February jointly by the government and its partners, remains gravely underfinanced to date. The same thing applies for the revised financial needs assessment, which now stands at $1.25 billion. Its goal is to assist at least 11 million people out of the 21.2 million currently in need. Given the volatile security situation in the eastern region of the DRC, one of the greatest challenges we face remains mobilizing the remaining funds to cover colossal needs. We take this opportunity to once again appeal to donors and other financial partners to ensure that the total funding gap of more or less 88.8% to ensure that gap can be fully closed. Madam President, before I come to a close, allow me to once again reassure the Council that my government is resolutely committed to seeking a lasting solution to put an end to a definitive end indeed, to the chronic crisis which has rocked the eastern part of my country for almost 3 decades. I repeat, for almost 3 decades. Finally, on behalf of my government, I wish to commend the signing this morning in Washington of the peace agreement between the DRC and Rwanda. I congratulate the American authorities for their successful mediation, and I congratulate the state of Qatar for its role as an intermediary. I say this with the hope of seeing this agreement lead to the effective and verified withdrawal of Rwanda's troops from the territory of the DRC without delay, as well as the withdrawal of their AFC M23 proxies from occupied areas to then rejoin the PDDRCS process. That is the Demobilization, Disarmament, Community Recovery and Stabilization Program. Thank you, Madam President.
Representative of the Democratic Republic of the Congo for his statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Rwanda.
Madam President, distinguished members of the Council, thank you for giving me the floor. I thank the Special Representative, Bintu Keita, for her briefing, as well as the colleagues who spoke before me for their statements. I thank you, Ambassador Kanu, for your visit to the region and for your report. Madam President, today's meeting comes at a crucial turning point. Earlier today, the government of Rwanda signed a peace agreement with the Democratic Republic of Congo brokered by the United States. We wish to thank the United States government for facilitating this breakthrough. We also commend the state of Qatar for its tireless mediation efforts between the DRC government and the AFC M23, which are expected to lead to an agreement between those parties in due course. The African Union, the East African Community, and the Southern African Development Community are equally central to resolving this conflict. While there is still some way to go, the path to lasting peace in the Great Lakes region is clearer now than it has ever been before. An important part of today's agreement is the provision for the parties to form a standing joint security coordination mechanism whose first order of business will be to oversee the implementation of the concept of operations for the neutralization of FDLR and the lifting of Rwanda's defensive measures as approved under the Rwanda process in November last year. These developments provide a new context to the debate here today, in particular on the role of MONUSCO in advancing peace and security in our region. Rwanda, like all countries, protects its people and its border by taking security measures commensurate with the threat faced and appropriate to the circumstances at any given time. Rwanda's unique history imposes heavy burdens in that regard. We will always discharge our right and duty of self-defense professionally and promptly. In the situation before us, the defensive measures are directly linked to a specific threat that is well known to the Council, and that is the FDLR, remnants of the forces that carried out the genocide against the Tutsi in 1994, and that continues to pursue the genocidal intent and ideology. It is not Rwanda alone which defines FDLR as a threat to the international peace and security. It is this Council as well. Resolution 1493 of 2003 called for the neutralization of FDLR. This was followed by Resolution 1509, 1533, 1552, 1649, 1698, 1807, 1856, 1896, 1925, 1991, 2053, 2078, 2198, 2293, 2409, 2511, 2765, and of course, 2773. All these resolutions defining FDLR as a threat to peace and committing all these resolutions defined FDLR as a threat and committed MONUSCO to address it. 20 resolutions over the period of 22 years, and I may have overlooked some of them. It never happened. This long and consistent record demonstrates that the international consensus on FDLR's threat is not in dispute. What is lacking is not clarity, but action. But it is not too late. As the peace agreement makes clear, the two matters of the threat of the FDLR and Rwanda's defensive measures are inherently inseparable. By ignoring one and dramatizing the other, MONUSCO rendered itself unable to effectively discharge its mandate in its totality. This does not have to remain the case. We welcome constructive contributions MONUSCO can make to the implementation of the peace accord, and are committed to supporting it in performing the relevant aspects of its mandate. Rwanda, therefore, welcomes the recent meeting between the Special Representative, Madam Bintu Keita, and the leadership of AFC M23 in Goma, and this was long overdue. The Special Representative, Madam Keita's engagement marks a constructive step forward and reflects what Rwanda has long encouraged: direct dialogue and to foster mutual understanding and address issues openly. MONUSCO can only be effective if it maintains trust with all parties, and the mission's efforts should be focused on supporting all such initiatives aimed at bringing about peace. Instead of acting on these repeated council mandates, MONUSCO has at times appeared to demonize any force or government that insists on implementing them. Accordingly, we believe that MONUSCO must urgently focus on the following areas to support these promising but still fragile efforts. First, by impartially prioritizing the protection of civilians. Second, by playing a constructive role in facilitating dialogue among all relevant actors. And third, by ceasing the amplification of politicized narratives that undermine confidence. It is a positive development that the mission has finally begun to engage with AFC M23 constructively. This shift is essential to building the trust and confidence needed on all sides to sustain meaningful dialogue and progress towards peace. We call on MONUSCO to tone down the rhetoric and end public attacks, and instead focus on working and engaging in supporting the fragile but credible diplomatic initiatives underway. Rwanda remains convinced that a negotiated political solution is the only responsible and viable path, particularly in light of the history of the Great Lakes region. The issues in the region, including the legitimate demand of AFC and M23 for civil rights, political inclusion, and implementation of previously agreed commitments, must be addressed seriously and through negotiation and dialogue. Failure to do so will only ensure the continuation of tension and the return of cyclical violence. Madam President, on the Secretary General's recent report, Rwanda reiterates the critical importance and impartial, non-politicized reporting. Balanced and factual reporting helps the Council to focus on root causes rather than symptoms, avoid instrumentalization, and make decisions that support long-term peace building. When objectivity is compromised, reports become tools for selective narratives rather than instruments for collective action. Finally, as we mark the 80th anniversary of the United Nations, Rwanda reaffirms its unwavering commitment to peace and stability in our region and to constructive diplomacy. We continue to engage in good faith, a sense of responsibility, and a sincere desire to be part of the solution. We continue to work hand in hand with the United Nations, regional organizations, and bilateral partners to ensure that the promise of this peace process is not only fulfilled, but sustained. We call on the DRC government to address their internal challenges and not externalize them. Rwanda is committed to supporting sustainable mechanisms that promote accountability and inclusive development. This includes participating in joint security efforts, confidence-building initiatives, and regional economic integration. We also see a unique opportunity to turn the page from the confrontation to collaboration, and from suspicion to trust, where our nations cooperate and prosper. As we look ahead, we urge this Council to uphold the principles of fairness, consistency, and peace. The true measure of this Council will not be in how many conflicts it has managed, but it will be in how many it has truly resolved. I thank you for your attention.
The representative of Rwanda for his statement. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. I now invite council members to informal consultations to continue our discussions on the subject. The meeting is adjourned.